me to record? Are you ready now? Is it live?
And for those of you who were on fire drill, it's my pleasure to introduce Prater. Anthony is a songwriter and self-described media historian born in San Antonio, who shortly after his birth moved a few miles south to Songwriter, where he was raised. In 1999, at the age of 14, he formed his first band. Those who remember hearing them might say they were all right, according to Anthony, although I'm sure he's being honest. Anthony spent his teens and 20s performing in various bands, most notably Trio, from 2009 to 2015. In addition to his solo pursuits, he fronts Irish folk rock group The Naggins and is the primary songwriter, lead vocalist, and rhythm guitarist for the group. For the indie rock band Hotel Orville. So thank you so much for joining us, and Anthony, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thank y'all for coming, for joining us today here at the Latino Collection Resource Center here at Central Library. I've been coming here for many years, since I was a kid, and it's crazy that I'm here doing this now. So, thank you for joining us. My name is Anthony Prater. I'm a musician here in San Antonio. I have 3 projects that I'm currently working on right now, or have been working on. Hotel Torgo, there's some links there. If you're interested in the other endeavors that I'm pursuing. I also have some cards up here whenever we're finished. They're there for y'all to take. I'm gonna ask if anyone has any questions or any comments or anything, please hold them to the end. We're gonna have a area of the program where y'all can ask any questions that y'all have. I'm going to start this with a disclaimer. So I do not hold a degree from any institution of higher learning in history, law, music, medicine, anything else. I did attend college, but I did not finish my degree. I'm a civil servant by day, and the rest of the time I'm a music enthusiast, history enthusiast. My self-appointed title is guerrilla historian, genealogist, researcher, archivist, and musician. I use that title because I believe you do not need a degree, nor do you need anyone else's permission to continue learning, expanding your areas of knowledge, accessing publicly available materials. However, degrees do lend you quite a bit of credibility. So that being said, let's dive in. In this program, we are going to probe the Clemente Apolinar case, explore his background, the social climate of the times, its place in history, and its place in our world today. We're going to I'm going to attempt to correct misconceptions that have skewed the view of this event, talk about the damage that family and community silence have and stigma can do to the historical narrative. I'm going to touch upon the research process and resources available to you to access information like I did. We're going to discover the role that music plays in documenting events in our history and by keeping them alive in our collective consciousness. We're going to be talking about instances of death and violence. Consider this a warning. There will be graphic descriptions. It's not nice or pretty, but it's reality. And I think it's a disservice to those who experienced that reality to minimize it in any way. So, to understand the event, we have to understand the times leading up to that event. In the 18th and 19th centuries in San Antonio, 1731 through 1810, settlers from the Canary Islands begin settling here in San Antonio. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 brings the United States border right up to northern Texas, New Spain's northernmost boundary. In 1810, the Mexican Revolution begins with the Hidalgo revolt. The revolution comes to San Antonio through these battles here, the Casas Revolt, battles of the Medina, Alazan, and Rosito Creek. Late in 1821, Stephen F. Austin arrives in Texas, San Antonio. In 1823, the Texas Rangers form. 1824 through 1835, Anglo settlers begin pouring into Texas. By 1830, they outnumber Tejanos 8-1. In 1835, of course, we all know from Texas history class, the Texas Revolution begins and concludes with the Battle of San Jacinto. 1836, retaliation starts against Tejanos that Anglos believe conspired or sympathized with Mexico. So it's killings, land grabs, land thefts, things like that. 1845 through 1900, Texas joins the United States. The Mexican-American War begins shortly after, and the landscape of Texas changes. Resentment grows as the racial, cultural, economic, religious differences and lines become more apparent. Tejanos and Mexicans are an integral part of this society, but they're still relegated to second-class citizenship. Which brings us to 1901. Gregorio Cortez, he's a tenant farmer living a couple counties over in Karnes County. He shoots and kills the sheriff after a series of mistranslations. The sheriff was investigating a horse theft, and his translator, who's an Anglo deputy, he confuses caballo and yegua, which is an important distinction in Spanish. He was asking about a horse, a caballo, which is a male horse. Gregorio traded for a yegua, which is a female horse, a mare. So out of that mistranslation, tempers flare, the sheriff pulls his gun, shoots Gregorio's brother. Gregorio pulls his gun, shoots the sheriff dead in self-defense. That becomes a manhunt, which lasts 10 days, over 500 miles. He rode on horse. 100 of that was on horseback or on foot before he was captured. 1910 through 1920, during that period, the Second Mexican Revolution begins. Texas is flooded with Mexicans trying to escape the violence and conflict. The population during that time of Mexicans in the United States triples. Tensions rise due to racial factors, raids that spill across the border, violence, lynching, land theft against Mexicans and Tejanos by Anglo vigilantes, also by the Texas Rangers. Not even to mention World War I's going on at that time. Red Summer, you have a lot of lynchings across the South, northern states of African Americans returning from the war. The plan of San Diego, Rangers disappearing or murdering Mexican Americans and taking their land. This time is known as La Matanza, or La Hora de Sangre. So who was Clemente Apolinar? Clemente Apolinar was born on the east side of San Antonio, November 23rd, 1890. Sometimes it's incorrectly listed as 1891. His father was Ignacio Vargas Apolinar, and his mother was Dominga Farias Vasquez. He was baptized at San Fernando Cathedral on February 1st of 1891. He attended public school on the east side, Fannin, which is no longer there, but the building's still there, but it's no longer in operation, and Smith School on Gevers, which I attended junior high at St. Gerard's right across the street from there. He lived on the grounds of the Alamo Masonic Cemetery on the east side, corner of Commerce and Pine, from 1899 till 1903. His father was the caretaker there. 1903, in October, his father dies of yellow fever at their home in the cemetery. He was 36 years old. Clemente, now almost 14, 13, getting ready to be 14 in about a month. He leaves school and begins to work, helping the family earn some money. So his roots here in San Antonio run deep. On his father's side, Clemente was the great-grandson of Juan Vargas. He was born in Oaxaca, Mexico in 1795. He participated with Father Hidalgo in the revolt of 1810, the first Mexican Revolution. He fought off and on different factions of the revolution until it ended 11 years later. In his mid-30s, Vargas moved to San Antonio with his family, arriving in 1830. In his 40s, he witnessed the Battle of the Alamo, not as a fighter, but he was conscripted, helping the wounded and burying the dead. Afterwards, he founded Our Lady of Guadalupe Chapel on the east side, 1904. The chapel was moved about 10 years later up, it was Nebraska Street at the time. Now it's Martin Luther King Boulevard, and it's Our Lady of Perpetual Help Parish. There's some really grainy photos there from an old newspaper, but there's a real clear shot. I believe it's from like the 1920s, 1930s. But he founded that parish. So moving on to his injury and his mental health. So in 1904, according to his brother Susano, Clemente was around 14 years old when he was involved in a fight with his cousin Feliciano and another boy. And during that fight, he got hit in the head with a rock and didn't go to the doctor. He personally didn't trust doctors after his father's death. So it was left to heal on its own. After that, his moods and behavior gradually changed. So a couple years later, 1906, around age 16, he disappears from home for about 3 days. He returns home and he's completely naked, walking down the street, cursing, spitting, just in the midst of a breakdown. And family members try to calm him. He fights them. He has to be restrained with ropes for 3 days after that. Calms down, kind of the episode leaves him. About a year later, in March of 2007, he was declared insane by the county in an insanity trial. So he was committed to the Southwestern Insane Asylum, which is now the San Antonio State Hospital on Presa. He was released after 10 months. In April 1909, he's now 18 years old. He experiences more attacks. They include seizures, talking to unknown people or unseen people, dead people, frothing at the mouth. He drinks excessive quantities of water, fights his family members with no provocation. He's declared insane a second time and committed by the county. During this stay, he escapes twice, each time brought back by his mother and brother to the hospital. He's released sometime in 1910. And this is where this section is called The Taste of Injustice. In 1910, the same year he's released, his great-grandfather, Juan Vargas's best friend, Pablo Lopez, who's in his 80s or 90s, he's killed by a prominent citizen named Christian Gembler. I don't know if y'all know Gembler, Ackerman Road, out there on the east side, that's named after those families. So he's a wood peddler gathering wood one afternoon. Gembler tells him to stop. Mr. Lopez, who doesn't speak English, takes off his hat. He has branches in another hand, walking towards him. 33-year-old Gembler pulls his pistol, tells him to stop. He doesn't stop walking, shoots him in the head, dead. He's arrested, claims self-defense, is bailed out almost immediately, which is unheard of for the time, on a murder charge. When Mr. Vargas is informed about Pablo's death, he's distraught, cries out for his friend. His health fades, and 7 days later, on August 19th, 1910, he dies at 115 years old. A couple years later, it takes a couple years, there's many delays. Gambler's finally brought to trial. Trial lasts a single day, and the jury deliberates for an hour, comes back with a verdict of not guilty. At this time, Clemente is 22 years old. In 1916, he suffers another onset of symptoms, is declared insane a third time by the county and committed. He's now been diagnosed by doctors as having dementia praecox, which we now know as schizophrenia. In 1917, he escapes this asylum for a third and final time. He is now 26 years old. And this is a photo of him by age 15, 16 from La Prensa. So the period between 1917 and 1921. During this time, we have very little information about his life and what it was like during this time. We do know he does not stay in San Antonio. He works away in the towns of Poth, Floresville, Sespamco, and Elmendorf in southeastern Bexar County, northern Wilson County. In 1917, according to his draft registration card, he's employed at the Star Clay Products, making bricks. They also make like pottery and things there. So he's employed there. In 1918, he makes his first trip out of Texas. He works in Tennessee at the old Hickory powder plant making gunpowder during World War I. After work there ceases in 1919, he comes back home and is almost immediately recruited to go to Alaska to work in a salmon fishing operation. So he works there for 7 months, comes back home to Texas in 1919, 1920, somewhere around there, working as a gardener, cotton picker, other odd jobs between Poth and San Antonio. 1921. So in late July of 1921, he travels to Poth to work in his cousin Luis Casanova's store or restaurant and soda fountain. And he's working there for a couple of weeks. August 6th, he gets into an altercation with a boy who tries to steal a rifle from the store or from the stand. He fights for control of the rifle. Witnesses say he's foaming at the mouth, his eyes are bulging and bloodshot, screaming, fighting for control of that rifle. Gets control of the rifle, turns, aims it at the boy, pulls the trigger. The rifle is fortunately unloaded. Clemente is arrested, placed in the Wilson County Jail in Floresville. While he's in there, he strips naked and burns his clothes, claiming that he's cold. Keep in mind that this is August in Texas, so it's 90-something degrees, 100 degrees during that time. So August 7th, he's bailed out by his cousin on the condition that he takes him directly to San Antonio. According to his cousin, before they can leave, Clemente jumps out of the car and disappears into the brush. The next day, on August 8th, one of the witnesses to the fight with the boy over the rifle sees him sitting out front in Poth on a bench smoking cigarettes from about midnight to 4 a.m. A few days later is the next sighting that I found. Vicente and Juanita Garza, they witness him foaming at the mouth and hiding a suit of clothes under the railroad tracks there just outside of Floresville. Around either that same day, night, or early morning of the next day, August 16th, he begins walking to San Antonio. He hitches a ride. Part of the way he's dropped off, he says he's dropped off at a place called Piedra Perada. I have not been able to find this on any map or any reference to this place. So if anybody has heard anything about a place like this, please let me know, and you might send me in another direction to find it. What's that? Oh, Piedra Parada is Spanish for standing rock. Like, yeah, it's like standing rock. So I believe it's probably somewhere in this area. Before 1966, 67, this area here was above water. Now it's Calaveras Lake. So I imagine maybe it's somewhere under the water there. August 16th, 1921. 8 or 9 a.m., the brothers Theodore and Kirby Bernhard, they leave their home on Westfall Avenue. They start heading down to a pasture a little half-mile away. The boys are students at Highland Park School. They're on summer break. The older boy, Theodore, he's a dairy hand for the Hopkins Dairy and Rosedale Creamery. His job today is tending cattle. So about 10:30 a.m., Clemente has been walking on the Sutherland Springs Road, which is now known as Roland Avenue. He passes the Gonzalez Road intersection, which is now known as Rigsby. He decides to stop in at a favorite spring for a drink. So this is the area as it appeared in 1953. You could see the spring right there, just off the road. There used to be a brick factory right in here called the Bem Brick Yard. Before it was the Williams, it had been there since the late 1800s. So this is where it's at now. It's an empty lot, backs up to a Baptist church. So warning, graphic descriptions ahead. All right. So Clemente gets to the spring, starts to drink. According to, according to two differing accounts, we only have two accounts of what happened. One from Clemente, one from Kirby, the brother. So some of the following occurred, for sure. The boys were either playing or lounging by the water. Clemente went to take a drink and found the muddy water there, unable to drink. According to Kirby, the cows had possibly walked through the water, muddied it. It was complete accident, unintentional. According to Clemente, the boys were throwing sticks and stones into the water, making it impossible for him to drink on purpose. They were laughing and taunting him. We do know for sure Clemente chased down the boys. He hit Theodore in the head, knocking him down. And Clemente begins beating Theodore on his back and head with rocks and his fists. As Clemente catches up to his brother, Kirby, the younger brother, runs into two elderly brothers by the name of Holmes. They consider themselves too old and too frail to help, so they continue on into town for help. Clemente continues his attack on Theodore. He breaks his skull open with rocks. He pulls out his brains and he puts them into Theodore's back pockets and smears them on his back. He then places one of Theodore's eyes into a piece of newspaper and he puts it into his own pocket. By this time, an employee of the brickyard, you can see the brickyard on this map here. It's that little, this is a symbol of a factory. So right here, so the murder's taking place in this general area. By this time, an employee of the brickyard comes across what's going on, sees Clemente screaming, foaming, in a general state, and wants to help. Is too afraid, so he leaves and gets a gun. By the time he comes back, Clemente is gone. So by this time, Kirby makes it home on Westfall Avenue, which is the blue dot down on the bottom. He tells his mother what's going on. By this time, he doesn't know that his brother's dead. So he continues on to Theodore's boss's home. which is the pink dot right in the middle there on the right. The creamery that he worked at is across the street on Cooper. The Holmes brothers make it to fire station number 9 on Mittman, which is the orangish one down here at the bottom. He tells the firefighters what's going on, and they call the police. A short time later, Clemente wanders into the yard of Rachel Miner, which is the pink dot up here towards the middle or the top of the map. He demands water from her, and he drinks it with what she describes as the desperation of a madman. His hands and clothes are still covered in blood. He's foaming at the mouth. His eyes are bulging. He's screaming, still in that state. He reaches into his pocket, pulls out the newspaper, and shows her the eye. Tells her that it's the eye of a man he just killed. And short time later, about 11:30. Not a short time later, but the period after that, from about 11:30 a.m. through about 3:30 p.m., he wanders the neighborhood with, no aim. And during that time, someone gives him a haircut and a shave. And he's still covered in blood at this time. So I don't know if it's a family member. His home is the yellow dot in the middle of the map here. So he knows the area, he knows people. So I don't know if someone was trying to help him, blend in or not, but, it kind of wouldn't matter because he's still covered in blood. So around 4 p.m., he's spotted entering the house of Andres Vargas, which is his cousin on Wyoming Street. It's going to be that green dot up at the top. Today, it is on the campus of St. Philip's College now. Police are called about 4:30. SAPD and Bexar County officers enter the house, find him hiding in a bedroom, and he surrenders with his hands up saying, "I'm the one you want." So his first night in jail, El Camaron, title of the album, El Camaron is the nickname for the Bexar County Jail on Camaron Street at the time. So his first night in jail, he's kicking, screaming, climbing the bars, breaking everything that isn't bolted down. Around midnight, deputies place him in a straitjacket. He remains in the straitjacket until the next morning, or into the next morning, when he makes his first court appearance. And keep this one in mind over here, this newspaper article, that comes into play later. Boy Slayer addicted to marijuana. So this is his mugshot, which was taken 2 days after his arrest. If you notice, he's still wearing the straitjacket right there. You can see the clasp up on top. So a few days before his trial, on September 4th, he gives an interview to a reporter from La Prensa. This is the first time we hear Clemente's story in his own words. The reporter asks him, how he's doing. He tells the reporter that he's being visited by his father. His father wants food, but he's frustrated because he has no food to give his father. The reporter asks, "Is this the father that died in 1903? And Clemente goes, "Yes, it's him. He comes to me. He asks me for food, and I have none to give him." He admits killing Theodore, and in great detail. He does not deny it at all. He talks of the asylum as if he was an employee there, not a patient. And the reporter concludes the interview. And this last section right here is going to be important later. He describes a boy about the age of 10 to 12 in another cell. The boy is clearly mentally ill, naked, bloodshot eyes. He's chewing on a cap and loudly kissing, like making kissing sounds against his hand, just standing in the middle of the cell. So that gives us an insight as to what's going on in jails around that time. A 10 to 12-year-old boy locked up for being, at the time, insane, mentally ill. So after this, his trial begins. His first attorney resigns on August 30th. His new attorney that was been appointed only has 5 days to prepare for trial. Capital murder trial, 5 days to prepare. That's unheard of now. His trial begins on September 6th, 22 days after his arrest. Many witnesses testify that he has been insane most of his life. They've known him, they've witnessed his behavior, and to them, he is certifiably insane. Other witnesses that the state puts on, they knew him for short periods of time or periods of time where he was not having his attacks. They rate their interactions with him as, he's a perfectly sane man. The state relies heavily on non-expert witness testimony. The state and county authorities also try to maintain that in 1917, his final escape, he did not escape. He was released because he was cured. His brother Susano testifies that Clemente did escape in 1917, and the family was only notified about this escape 1 year after the fact by letter. And his lawyers submit the letter as evidence into his trial. He also testifies about a phone call in which the asylum directors and administration ask if they want Clemente to be written down as discharged, which they say no, because he needs to be back in the asylum because he's dangerous, he's violent, and they were afraid he would become violent again. So the jury deliberates for 18 hours and delivers a guilty verdict on Saturday, September 11th. He's sentenced to hang. 1922, the year begins on January 6th with the execution of George Grace. He's a 21-year-old black man who was sentenced to death for an alleged assault upon a white woman in 1920. Grace goes to his death maintaining his innocence. Clemente takes Grace's place in the death cell and shows no reaction during the whole preparation, the testing of the rope and the gallows, and through the execution. He has zero reaction to this. Over a year and 3 months after his initial trial, a second trial begins to determine his sanity. Witnesses testify to other behaviors as, talking to his dead father, his grandfather. He talks about visiting a world that exists below ours, which he calls the third world. And in this world, people who exist there dig up the bodies of the dead and feast upon them. And he doesn't want to eat, so he comes back to our world. He also visits a world above ours where he's able to touch the sky. He also speaks of a man who he witnessed his murder named Velasco Herrera. And after the murder, this man would visit him constantly. And I've searched the records. I haven't found record of this murder, this death. So I don't know if, is possibly the name is wrong or it's a figment of his imagination. During this trial, Dr. Berry, who's like the head health officer of the county at that time, they testify that the words and actions of Apolinar before, during, and after the murder indicate that he is insane. This is expert testimony. Berry goes on to say that medical professionals agree that dementia praecox, schizophrenia, is not a curable condition. Week later, the jury goes out for 1.5 hours and deliberates, and they come back and they say Clemente is a completely sane individual and should be executed. And this is a photo that was taken about January, February of 1922. So 1923, about January 1923, Judge Whaling and Dr. Berry both petitioned the governor. They believe that there's enough evidence to show that Clemente is insane and should not be executed. Governor Neff, though, decides that he's not going to intervene at all. Later January, Apolinar spends his time singing, dancing, eating oranges and apples with every meal it said with great relish. He has gained 50 pounds while in jail. Jailers say that this is completely unusual. February 19th, Sheriff Tobin tests the rope in the trap door. Again, Clemente has zero reaction to this. February 21st, a neighboring woman who lives on Dolorosa Street, Miss Maria Hernandez Soria, has her son deliver Clemente a huge meal a couple of days before his execution. He eats every bit of it, soaks up everything on the plate with bread, and eats it with great relish. He's visited by 4 priests who are his spiritual advisors. He takes their visit, prays with them. Taylor comes and takes final measurements for a suit, and he has a shave. He requested that the copy of the photo on the left be given to his mother. Well, the reporter talking to him convinces him, hey, you just had a shave. Why don't you take another photo for your mother? Be a lot nicer. So he sits for the photo on the right. February 23rd, it's execution day. Clemente dresses in his new suit, hears mass in his cell. About 100 and 150 people are allowed into the jail to witness his execution. Those not allowed in climb the neighboring buildings and walls, trying to get a view of the 3rd floor execution chamber. The 2nd floor is clear, aside from police, jailers, and other health officials. Inmates begin to sing hymns about half an hour before. About 11 o'clock, he's taken out from his cell, taken to the gallows, which is essentially a metal plate on the floor. And the trap door opens. He drops to the 2nd floor. And this is where it doesn't go to plan. The rope tears open the right side of his neck. His jugular vein and his carotid artery are ripped. Blood squirts out of the wound. He hangs there for 3 minutes, and he's declared dead at 11:10. So these are front page articles from that day. The Stevens problem. So this section is about G.W. Stevens, George W. Stevens. Clemente was not supposed to be the last man executed at the Bexar County Jail. That was supposed to be George W. Stevens on March 9th of 1923. Little background on Stevens. 1921, he shoots Dr. Bailey in the chest after an argument at Alamo Plaza. Doesn't kill him, but severely injures him. Later that year, on August 24th, 1921, Stephen gets into an altercation with Mrs. Maddie Funicane. It's about a broken window of a house that he's building on Louisiana Street on the southeast side. And her husband gets home, goes to talk to Mr. Stevens, and Stevens pulls a gun and shoots him in the chest. And as Thomas runs home, he continues firing shots into him in front of his wife and 2 daughters. So they testify in court. It's alleged as well that Stevens has ties to the Klan. There's been some threatening letters sent to some people. So this man kills an unarmed man over a broken window and some missing shingles. Claims self-defense. He's found guilty still and sentenced to hang. 1923, shortly after Clemente's execution, Governor Neff has shown no interest in this case whatsoever over the last couple of years. 9 days before the execution, he announces that he's considering clemency. So a day later, would be March 2nd, with no prior mention of illness, Stevens is said to have tuberculosis, and he wants to take a test. So his lawyer gets a test set up for him. March 4th, Stevens is said to have tested positive for tuberculosis and only has a short time to live. March 7th, 1923, Governor Neff announces he's commuted his sentence to life in prison. He's sent to Huntsville, where he's expected to die any day. So fast forward 3 years to 1926, still alive and in Huntsville prison. It's announced that Governor Ma Ferguson has granted Stevens a full pardon. And note that during this time, both Governors Neff and Paul Ferguson and Ma Ferguson, who were governors during that time, it's been alleged that they sold pardons during this time for commutations and pardons. So I have some more investigating to do after this. Stevens leads a quiet life for the next 6 years. Then in 1932, he reappears in Wharton County, which is between here and Houston. He kills a man over a log, ownership of a log. And 1933, he's sentenced, found guilty and sentenced to 25 years in prison. He dies in 1936, not of tuberculosis, but of kidney failure caused by an enlarged prostate. So during this time, tuberculosis was a death sentence still. Not until the 1940s did we have adequate treatment for this. So did he have tuberculosis? Did he not? Who's to say? And that concludes the historical portion of this. Musical tradition. Music is important in capturing events in our history. So for my album and the songs, the two main influences I had were murder ballads and corridos. So I'm going to talk about murder ballads first. Murder ballads, they are all throughout history, different cultures, different genres, different times. So one that caught my ear years ago was the original Staccalee Blues. Some of you who grew up in the 1950s, 1960s might remember it as Stagger Lee. So it was about a murder of Willie Lyons by Stagg Lee Shelton, St. Louis of 1895. Here we are in 2023. There's still musicians covering this song to this day. Boomtown Rats. It's a pop song, but also a murder ballad. It's called I Don't Like Mondays. It's about a school shooting in 1979. There's a young girl named Brenda Spencer. She shot out her front window, and across the street, she killed 2 people and injured 9. And when asked about her motive for the crime, she simply said, "I don't like Mondays." And Bob Dylan, of course, folk. Only a Pawn in Their Game, 1963. It's about the murder and assassination of Medgar Evers, by later to found to be a Klansman. Kind of talks about how Medgar Evers was murdered, but his assassin isn't the agent of change he thinks he is. He's simply a pawn. He's the lower class, poor lower class fall guy for the upper echelon. So he's only a pawn in their game. So early corridos. So one of the earliest surviving examples of a corrido is Kansas, or Corrido de Kansas. And it's from about the 1850s, 1860s, and tells the story of a group of Mexican vaqueros showing up a larger group of Anglo cowboys as they have a cattle drive to Kansas. They have superior horse riding skills. They have superior cattle wrangling skills, things like that. Kind of just like a boastful, like, look at us. Look how good we are compared to the 50 of y'all compared to 5 of us to do the same job. Moving on to later corridos, 1901, we talked about Gregorio Cortez earlier, about the killing of Sheriff Morris, and the manhunt took hundreds of men to locate this one man over the course of 10 days, and how he eluded them. Another one, Venimos a Matamoros, or also known as La Batalla de Ojo de Agua. It tells the border troubles between Texas Rangers and Texas Mexican ranchers around Brownsville, and violence between them, battles going on back and forth. These are known as hero corridos, and hero corridos, bad things are still happening. It's one man against the machine, and the machine still wins at the end, but at least the one man is standing up to them. So we have later corridos from the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. The first example I'm going to talk about is Rinches de Texas. It's about the Starr County melon strikes of 1966 and 67, the violence that was visited upon strikers by the Texas Rangers. If you don't hear it by now, there is a theme: the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers are always somehow involved in this violence, state-sanctioned violence. So here we are in 1967, the year my mother was born. This is still going on. This next one was written by Salome Gutierrez. I don't know if you're familiar with Del Bravo Records on Old Highway 90. He's the one that started that record company / record store. I was in there a few weeks ago talking to his daughter about this song that he wrote. It's called Asesinato de un Niño in Dallas, Texas. And for those of you alive in 1973, y'all might have heard this. For those of you who weren't, it's about a young boy, about 12 years old, named Santos Rodriguez. That's him and his brother right there. They were accused by Dallas police officers of breaking into a soda machine in a gas station. They were taken from their home. They were in bed, taken from their home that they shared with their grandfather, put into the back seat of a car. Officers were getting frustrated because the boys were denying any involvement. One of the officers pulls out his revolver, claims to have dumped out all the shells. To scare him, spins his revolver, puts it against his head, tells him, "You need to confess." Click. "You need to confess." Click. "I didn't do anything, officer. I had nothing to do with it." Pulls the trigger again. Boom. He's shot to death in front of his brother. He's handcuffed in the backseat of the car. The officer, his name is Daryl Kane, who has since died. He died in 2019. He was sentenced to about 5 years in prison for this, and he served maybe like a year and a half. So these are recurring themes of subjugation and abuse by authorities, but they all have a tragic ending. These are known as victim corridos. They're, I guess, more memorializing people after the fact. Which brings me to El Camaron, the EP that I wrote. What started me on the path to this was my own family tree. A few years ago, I started doing some genealogical research. Came upon familysearch.org. It's a free site, and everything I'm going to talk to you about today is free. Absolutely $0 out of your pocket to do this type of research. So familysearch.org gives you access to birth records, death records, marriage, divorce records, burial records, and church records. It's good. It's very user-friendly, but there's a lot of spelling errors. Like whenever you're looking for things, for people's names, maybe, try alternate spellings, things like that. It gets you there a little, broadens it a bit, makes it a little easier. So what that one was lacking, I was kind of hitting a brick wall. Then I found out through word of mouth, visiting my public library, that San Antonio Library had access to Ancestry.com and another website called Heritage Quest. So in that one, same as Family Search, but a little bit more detailed. You can get yearbooks, city directories, military records, some, and which led me to newspaperarchive.com, which Everything you see from the newspapers in here, most of them came from newspaperarchive.com. Fold 3 also gives you military records, birth records, death records, marriages, things like that. So all these different databases and websites, what one lacks, the others make up for. And it kind of makes one tool, like a Voltron. You're posting these tools together. Thank you for laughing at that. Nobody else did. So it becomes one super tool in your research process. Also, librarians, archivists, things like people like that, they are an invaluable resource. They pointed me in the right direction every time I needed. Went to the UTSA photo archives. They helped me out quite a bit there. Here at the genealogy department, they were great. So the road to this began years ago with the Google search. Using all of this material that I came up with for my own family, I wrote a song, and it's about, I don't know if you've heard it, Sharon. I don't know if I played it for you. I did some research into where Grandpa and Grandma lived, and you live there in the old neighborhood Germantown in Hemisphere. So you lived in Hemisphere before it was Hemisphere. So I wrote a song about that. So that was my first attempt at like historical music, historical type things. So I'm blending the two together. So El Camaron began with a Google search. Little bit of information about Clemente Apolinar, very little. And what was out there wasn't very high quality. It all geared towards haunting, paranormal type stuff. And I just want the meat. I want the meat, not the potatoes. I want the meat of the matter, which is the historical, accurate depictions. So now that I was familiar with all these other tools that I was using, I put them to work. So the more I learned, the more I needed to know. It was an itch in my brain that needed to be scratched. I needed to know more. So using all the skills that I acquired, I found living relatives. I reached out to them. Some of Clemente's and both Bernhard, Kirby, and Theodore's relatives, reached out to them. Some were willing to talk, but they had little to no information about what I was looking for. And that takes us back to the stigma and the silence in not only communities, but families. It's somebody's embarrassed. They don't want to bring up painful memories. They don't want to bring up the past. Best let sleeping dogs lie. That is very detrimental to the historical narrative. It's important that we talk about these things. If they're painful, if they're embarrassing, we still need to talk about them because future generations are going to be the ones who miss out on this. And it's important that you don't let others control your family's narrative. You are in control of your narrative. The Apolinar family are in control of their narrative. They should be. They should be not ashamed of this. This is something that happened. It's history. It's our city. And others that I talked to, they claimed to have information, but they were very protective, very guarded, which I completely understand and respect. But like I said, do not leave future generations wondering. On to the next section. Echoes in today's world. So we're going to start with the section Reefer Madness. Almost immediately after the murder, this is maybe like the 18th of August, which is 2 days after the murder, Dr. Berry and Deputy Chief Alfonso Newton over here, future Sheriff Newton of Bexar County, they begin pushing the narrative that Apolinar is addicted to marijuana. He's a marijuana fiend, smoking marijuana, or as people called it at the time, Mexican loco weed. Drove him to murder, made him bloodthirsty. He was sane. He was just driven to this by marijuana. As you can see in some of these headlines, I don't know if maybe they're Mexican local weed, geared towards Mexicans only. Remedy for loafers. That article up there talks about how shiftless and lazy Mexicans are, and they need to be put to work because they were found with marijuana in their pockets, and it makes them not want to work, so they're forced onto chain gangs, things like that. Very racist undertones. In the 1940s, the Apolinar case was added to Harry J. Anslinger's Gore file. The file is a collection of all these anecdotal stories from across the United States where somebody, I don't know if you remember in the 1970s, maybe that started, a hippie couple gets high and they put their baby in the microwave and, you know, juice it up that way. Urban legends, things like that. Just kind of scare tactics, propaganda against cannabis for use in their war on drugs. So his agency's enforcement and policies are geared towards non-whites and immigrants, and he speaks of this very openly. Anslinger's, him right here, he is largely responsible for our current drug laws in the United States. So that's the effect on our world today. Also an effect on our world today, jails and the mentally ill. These are all articles from right here in San Antonio. The jail is kind of used as a way station for the mentally ill. The San Antonio or the Southwestern Institute or the Insane Asylum, they have no more room. They're filled to the gills. So these people who have committed no other crime than having a mental illness are confined in jail as if they were prisoners. And in these articles, jailers themselves are complaining about this. Like, how do we treat these people? These people aren't criminals. We have to keep them in with criminals. So it's kind of hard to differentiate between the two. And good thing that that's all in the past, right? Nope. So these two articles, this one is from about, a month ago. This one's from a couple of weeks ago. So according to a report last month by the San Antonio Report, out of the 4,675 people in the county jail today, 292 are classified as incompetent to stand trial. They have some sort of mental illness that does not allow them to be tried by law. So they're waiting for transfer to the mental hospital to get treatment. And out of those 292 people, 51 of them have been in jail for over 500 days. 500 days. A jail is a detention facility for people who are going to trial. And in our country, we have something that affords us the right to a speedy trial, right? The Constitution of the United States. This is in direct violation of that same Constitution. So it costs you and I about $416 per day per individual to keep these people in jail. And they're getting minimal treatment for the issues they have. A lot of them, their condition deteriorates. The suicide rate right now is pretty high. So correlation, causation, still have some research to do on that. 2 weeks ago, the Houston Chronicle said statewide 2,500 are awaiting treatment. It's not that the beds aren't there. It's that, of course, what are we hearing every day? Staffing problems. There are jobs there. It's just they cannot retain the people, or they do not want to pay the people. It is, I think I drove by on New Braunfels the other day. They had a sign out front of the state hospital. They were hiring at like $15 an hour, $16 an hour. And I don't know about you, but that's a hard job. And I don't think that's, $15 an hour is not going to cut it. The state invests billions over the last few years updating hospitals. Those beds are left unused because of those staffing shortages. So those people remain in jail. They will continue to remain in jail. So I don't know if what can be done about that. Of course, writing your commissioners, your Congress people, things like that. Which brings us to the conclusion of my talk up here. I've been talking for a long time, and I usually don't do that. I'm cool with getting up in front of people and singing, but talking is like, maybe this is my talking for the month. So in conclusion, this is a photo that the blogger will remain nameless. I do not want people harassing him. I do not want, maybe this was done out of ignorance. Maybe this was done because the AI generation of the photograph made Clemente deformed, disfigured, things like that. That's the same photo on the side. You notice his ears not folded over, his eye isn't bulging, he has no cut across the bottom of his mouth. He's not deformed or disfigured in any way. So I can only assume this was done out of either a mistake or ignorance. But if it was done out of ignorance, I would like to say that monsters do not exist. Evil does not exist. The world is scary enough with the things that people do to each other every day. We do not need to create monsters. Just because this man was mentally ill and he committed a horrible crime does not mean that he is this disfigured monster over off to the side. Is anybody who commits a crime a monster? No, they are people. There are people who commit crimes. There are people who commit lesser crimes. They make mistakes. We have a justice system that is supposed to punish those people and correct these mistakes. So he committed this crime, which, no denying it, he didn't even deny it himself. He describes it in great detail. But I personally believe he should not have been executed. Did he know what he was doing? Was he in complete control of his faculties? I don't think so. And I would say that this was the times that they were living in, but we still have this going on today. There's a couple of guys on death row today suffering from schizophrenia. One, I forget his name, but he gouged his own eyeball out because he read a passage in the Bible saying that he should take an offending eyeball out. Threw it away a few years later, tore out the other one, ate it. Is he in complete control of his faculties? I don't think so. So is it right? Is it wrong? Yeah, I'm not trying to preach to y'all. It's like up to you to decide. But I will say this: Clemente's punishment fit the crime, but sometimes the punishment does not fit the criminal. And just keep that in mind. And me personally, it's kind of like I've spent a lot of time with Clemente over the last 4 or 5 years, to the point where I dream. I was looking for things, and I would dream, and the more I would spend time with this case, the more empathy I would try to have. And me personally, I drive around the city and I see Clemente on the street corner every day, because there's really no place for people in our society that are suffering from mental illness, things like that. It's easier to ignore them. It's easier to turn a blind eye. They're living on the street. But it's kind of where we're at right now, where we need to be. Maybe we'll get there one day. But I want to thank all of y'all for coming. And I want you to know that history is important. Music and art are important. Libraries, archives, and other repositories of knowledge and free access to them are very important and essential. Understanding the past is the only way to reconcile with it. Talk to your elders, talk to your juniors, talk to your peers. Document your family stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Whatever your interest is, Whatever questions need answers, the tools are out there for you to find those answers. Stay curious and never stop learning. Thank you for coming. And then the musical portion of this, if you decide to stay or not, I'm going to perform the song El Camaron. You can listen to the lyrics and you can maybe pinpoint my research. But yeah, this is El Camaron. A name long forgotten, and a body long rotten, and blood long dried on the stones. The loss of one's breath from dancing with death in the graveyard he once called home. He was just 29. For him, life was fine, just rambling, living out, living free. Went down to catch a drink, but nobody'd ever think of such a bloody mess on the banks of the spring. He was the last man to hang, the last one to sway, the last one for El Camaron. They said he was wild, with the mind of a child, but still they'd want an eye for an eye. It don't forgive what he did, killing the kid, but 2 wrongs, they won't make it right. A madman, they say, was born for the grave, and the same can be said for us all. A few men before have gone through the door, and now he'll be the last one to fall. He was the last man to hang, the last one to swing, the last one for El Camaron. No llores, mi hermano, tú cuidas a nuestra madre y susurra una oración por mí. Tras un frajo y nos veremos, me voy al cielo o al infierno, una caída me hará libre. María, mi madre, el Hijo y Padre, sácame alma de aquí. Me pondré de rodillas, suplicar al Señor, concédame un poco de paz. El último en colgar, el último columpiar, el último para El Camaron. He was the last man to hang, the last one to swing, The last one for El Camaron. Thank you for coming. Thank you. If y'all are interested in the album, I have a card here that if you scan with your phone, you could either download it, find my socials, or it'll take you to my website where you could buy the CD. Thank you for coming. Appreciate y'all.
Don't see you guys enough.
I know. How y'all been?